Who's been to New Zealand before? What's that, like a third? Half of you. Who's been to Central? Oh, that's really getting down there. Who's been to Wanaka? Wow, awesome. So you guys know nothing. I could tell you anything. I guess you've just arrived in from Canterbury. It was good times.
Yes.
Yeah. I heard Marlborough was really good as well.
Yes.
You guys went through a river and just about got swept downstream.
Yep. Woohoo!
Awesome. How are we gonna do that? We've got a couple of days planned for you. Blair, who you've already met, him and his team and the team have been responsible for it. Not much coming from me, but I'm gonna what I can do is just give you a bit of an introduction to the area, give you some history, a little bit of geography and geology as well, and then we're going to go into our first tasting, which is going to be, or it's a workshop, and that's more about sort of a sub-regional workshop. It's sort of like the 101 of Central Otago. But I think a nice way to start, a nice way to talk about Central Otago is following a mihi. Have anyone done a mihi before? It's the way that as New Zealanders we express who we are. Our identity is tied to the land, and it starts with the mountain, and then it goes down to your river. So the mountain is the biggest thing you can see from the ground, so it connects you to land. The next thing is your river, so what side of the mountain you're on, and then a lake. So when that sort of coalesces or slows down, sometimes that's where people like to hang out, close to a lake, so we can talk about that as well. And then we sort of get into perhaps a little bit of flora and fauna history, and then we can even go into a little bit of human history, ancient and modern. But we haven't got a huge amount of time to do all that, so I'm just going to try and do it really quickly. Am I speaking at a pace that you can all understand?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so basically our mountain, well, we start off with a planet really. It's a molten ball of rock floating around in a vacuum. It's far enough away from its sole source of energy that it gets a crust of rock on the outside of it. Starts coalescing, or at some point a big Mars-sized planet bust into it and belched this big piece of rock out into the space, and that coalesced into the moon, which slowly got further and further away from us over the billion years of this particular, our planet was coalescing, and it got this sort of crust of rock on the outside. All the heavy stuff went down, the light stuff came up, and as the moon got further away, and it was able to, these plates were able to start getting stronger. They started pushing into each other and creating upthrust and subduction and orogeny and pushing in. And the biggest one that happened here is the Pacific plate, which is all of this stuff out here. Pushing into the Tasman plate, or the Australasian plate, which is sitting out on this side, and one went down and one went over, and came up out of the ocean and created created New Zealand. But really, the Southern Alps of New Zealand is this big mountain chain that you see here in front of you. You haven't been through it yet. You haven't been over one of the passes, but here in front of us is pushed up, and it's created these Mount Aspiring National Park. So Mount Aspiring is our mountain. But also Mount Aspiring National Park, there are a number of other big mountains. You've got Earnslaw down here. You've got Otago a bit further down. Here you've got Avalanche, the three-pronged one there with the glacier on the front of it. That's Mount Avalanche. Just to the left of it, if you can see behind the Brown Mountain in the foreground, you can see Rob Roy, the glacier sticking out the top of that. And around the corner again is Mount Aspiring. These are all sort of 3,000 metre peaks. They come straight out of the ocean. And the highest mountain's outside the Mount Cook Massif, which is a bit further north. You would have seen it on the way down. So what's that done is, we can talk about schist in a moment, but in terms of the metamorphic rock that's created. But let's talk about that now. It's come out, and it was grey wacky, like a sandstone, a sedimentary rock. But because it was recrystallized under heat and pressure, it did so and metamorphosized into schist. And that's where in Central Otago we're sitting on the largest block of schist in the country. And it's almost unique to our region in terms of a whole region being on that. So schist is a really important part of who we are. You can see all the mountains of that. It's lots of foliated mica and quartzite in that. It gets brought around the valley systems by lots of different means, and we'll hear about that later on in the tasting. Mount Aspiring National Park, it blocks all of our weather. This is what's happening right now. It's coming around. In the northern hemisphere, you've got these jet streams that go around. They go over mainly just land. Down here, they go mainly over ocean. So they're coming around underneath Australia, or they only hit South America and us basically, come around underneath Australia. Lots of moisture and velocity because of that, and they hit these huge peaks straight out of the ocean, bank up, condense. So on that ridge right there, 5 to 10 meters of rain falls every year. 5 to 10 meters of rain falls right on that ridge right there, one of the wettest places in the planet. And as it comes across here, it dissipates. You've got ridge and rainforest on the other side, and as you can see here, it's semi-arid, and it's dissipating and drying out as it goes down this valley. So you're going to hear about that as well. Yeah, we could do that right now. So basically, Central Otago. Sorry?
Rainfall here?
Rainfall here is about 700 millimeters. It goes down to about 200 millimeters further down the valley. So it's basically a Y. Central Otago is like a Y on its side like this. Okay? So it's like we're here, say right up the top, and you've got the Clutha River runs out down here. Now we're talking about rivers. We were talking about mountains, we're going to go to rivers. That's the side we're on. So down from here, and on this side, you've got the Wakatipu Basin, which is over behind us here. This is Queenstown, this is Wanaka, the Kawerau River and the Cromwell River. You'll see this on your maps when you get them. Sorry, make sure you pick up one of these little booklets when you go back inside there. You turn it on its side, Central's looks a bit like that. North's out here, 5 degrees off the vines, west. So the Southern Alps of New Zealand cross the north-south axis on a diagonal like that. So Fjordland's way down there, and Marlborough, where you came from, is way up there. This is the wall that's in front of us right now. Wanaka, Queenstown, Clutha River, the Kawerau River. They come down in the confluence on the way. You've got Bendigo down behind us here. And then down at the confluence, you've got Cromwell, Bannockburn. And then down further again, you've got Alexandra. And as it's going down, it's roughly drying out and getting more continental the further you go that way. And you can imagine how that's happening right now. Those mountains right now, they're banking up on that rainforest on the backside there, and they're dissipating over like this and getting hotter and colder and drier the further we go that way. So Alexandra is New Zealand's hottest and coldest and driest place. Further down the valley, about 80 kilometres that way. New Zealand's only pseudo-continental climate. Continental climate, it's not a continent, but it's pseudo-continental. It's like a plume of fresh air that's coming out the backside of these mountains here. It's protected from the south and the east. So that's what Central is. Every time you come in, you're going to come over a pass like you just did in the Lindis, or you're going to have to come up a gorge like you're probably going to go down or through. So Central's a high inland basin. Series of valleys, if you like. So yeah, maybe can I have one of those, please?
Why not?
So on the front, you're going to get this map. So we can just go on that a little bit, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about the history. So it's a black and white map, but you can kind of see it's like a Y, like I said. Wanaka up where we are at the top here. This is the main divide going here. Queenstown, the Gippsland drawing cooler air in from the southwest, and all of this going down this way. We're going to get that in more detail in just a second. So in terms of our history, does that give you a little bit geology, geography? We're going to get a little into more detail, but that's just the overview. All right, in terms of the history, I guess there were it came out of the ocean, so everything had to either swim here or fly here, or eventually boat here. But that means that everything divaricated. Divaricating is like all of our grazers, everything, all the cows and everything that would otherwise eat the pasture and keep things low were birds. They had to fly here. So everything divaricated, like our, so I don't know, some of these, the Madagascar stuff, it's all really hard. It all wears its flesh on the skeleton on the outside and the flesh on the inside. That's kind of what our native flora looked like was, and the fauna that adapted with it were basically birds that lost their wings. They were the first things here. Next things come along is the Maori. The Maori came from obviously from the North Island and down the east coast. Remembering that the west coast is it's super exposed. It's where all the weather comes from. It's also the wettest, but there's no natural portages either. There's two natural portages, one at the top and one at the bottom. just sort of like coves. Everything else is river mouths. So all the Māori were stationed. They settled on the east side and came up here in the summer because there were no land mammals. There was no bear pelts, nothing warm to wrap themselves in. They were dressed in feathers. So they came up here in the summers in semi-permanent camps and came up into these zones and to collect greenstone, our punamu, our local greenstone, but also to hunt for eels, some carbohydrates. Cabbage trees were up here as well. Our place names reflect a lot of that as well. All good, thank you. Thanks, Steve. For example, I'll talk about Wanaka when we get in there. Wanaka, Wananga. It's a soft inland camp. Next thing you have is Europeans coming in. 1836 is when Te Pōhu came through, a warring chieftain came down the west coast and came through this area and with 100 warriors tried to gut the fish from the tail up, basically take the South Island from the bottom up. And that didn't work, but basically stripped out this whole area through here. By the time Europeans came along, there was no Māori settlements here. So when the treaty was signed in 1840, the Waitangi Treaty, and then in 1855 you had the Wastelands Act, which meant that any wasteland, any unoccupied land was open for land prospecting. This opened the way for land prospectors, Europeans. The first was John Turnbull Thompson. Nathaniel Chalmers. Nathaniel Chalmers, 23-year-old land prospector from Dunedin, from the east coast, came up here with his guide Rico into this basin. He would have been the first European to see the inland and the interior in here. Travelling for 2 weeks through divericaceous plants, Matagari, stuff like that, totally scratched up, became infected. Rico built him a mokihi, a flax raft, and he drifted off back down to safety. And that's another crazy story. And ask Blair about mokihi when you get a chance as well for what we've done in the last few years about habitat restoration. Anyway, that was Nathaniel Chalmers came in here in 1853, 2 years before the Wastelands Act was signed. The next person, 1857, I believe, came over. This is Grandview over here, the mountain on the skyline. Actually, he just came past it. He came from the Lindis Pass over through here, a much easier way to come, and sat on the top of there and surveyed this whole area, not just this basin, but other basins besides. Shortly after that, we had gold rush. So in the 1860s, gold was discovered. Firstly, a bit further down the valley, down the Clutha towards the sea, but then in Kawerau in 1866, I think it was. I might be making that up, somewhere like that. And this is when really things started to happen. And in 1867, 1868, you've got people coming in from all around the world. In our case, from a viticultural point of view, an interesting guy, Jean Désiré Ferraud, came in and planted the first vines in here. We know that he got some award for making some special Burgundy style wine in Sydney. Well, made it here, but got an award for it. And this may be the first part of our indication that grape growing might work here. Brigato came in around the same time. Romeo Brigato, you would have heard about him no doubt on your travels, said that there was possibly something that could work down here, but that was kind of forgotten about for the next 100 years almost, and it came down to the next pioneers into the region in terms of wine. You had Annie Pinckney and Rolf Mills in the early 70s experimenting with vines in here at Rippon and also in Taramea just over at the valley. Soon to be followed by Vernon Burgess and Sue down at Alexandra, Bill Grant also in Alexandra, and Alan Brady in Gippsland. This is in the early 80s, some crazy, all in different corners of Central. They created the Central Otago Wine Growers Association, and at that point is really, for us, it's the start of our identity as wine growers. Before that, they were just pioneers in their own right. But when they formed this association and it became a collective of growers, this is where we sort of start off. We need to go in? Yeah. Okay. So that's about it really, and I guess that brings us almost up to speed anyway. Like next thing that happens is just beautiful collective understanding, sharing, 30 years of it, and now here we are. You're about to discover all of how that all came together and what it's created over the next little while. It's a pretty cool story really, and you know, this wasn't easy necessarily, but I think in terms of the landscape and the varieties that found themselves comfortable here, but I think just in terms of the culture that was created and the people and how we're all sort of, you know, you'll see how we work and how we communicate. It's that collective approach and communication is what really have got us where we so quickly. In 30 years it's nothing, but you know our wines probably already, and you're about to rediscover them again, and it's really about people, not just place.
And
all right.
Your family is from this place?
Yep. Since 1912. Yep. We're fourth going on fifth generation on the land. 106 years on the land. 7 years this year. 107 years. Yeah. All right. Should we move on through?
Yep.
And we'll get into some tasting some wine and furthering that conversation.
Were you planting grapes in 12?
No, in 1973, I think we bought it.